Imagine a young Jewish orphan who becomes the queen of a vast empire. Now imagine this same queen risking everything to save her people from genocide. Beauty, palace intrigue, deadly conspiracies, and extraordinary courage. The story of Esther has all the elements of an epic film, but what makes this narrative truly powerful is how it illustrates courage in the face of adversity and divine providence in action. In the next few minutes, we will delve into this incredible journey of faith and heroism. Get ready to discover how an ordinary young woman became the savior of an entire nation. This is the story of Esther, the queen who changed the course of destiny. I was a young Jewish woman named Hadassah, but I was known as Esther, the name I adopted when I was taken to the palace of King Xerxes in Persia. My story begins in a difficult time for my people, who were living in exile in a foreign land. I was raised by my cousin Mordecai, as my parents had died when I was still a child. Mordecai was a just and God-fearing man, and he taught me the importance of keeping faith, even in difficult times. But before I continue speaking about myself, let's go back to where it all began. It was the time of King Xerxes, who reigned over a vast empire, ruling over 127 provinces, from India to Ethiopia. He ruled with great power and magnificence from his throne in the citadel of Susa. In the 3rd year of his reign, King Xerxes decided to hold a great banquet for all his nobles and officials. The military leaders of Persia and Media, as well as the princes and nobles of all the provinces, were present. For 180 days, King Xerxes displayed the full wealth of his kingdom, the splendor and the glory of his majesty. At the end of this period, the king hosted a special 7-day banquet in the inner garden of the palace for all the people who lived in the citadel of Susa, from the richest to the poorest. The garden was a place of unparalleled beauty, adorned with white and blue hangings, fastened with cords of fine linen and purple fabric, attached to silver rings on marble columns. The couches were made of gold and silver, and the floor was a mosaic of precious stones, including porphyry, marble, and mother of pearl. Royal wine was served in abundance, and each guest was allowed to drink as much as they pleased, in golden goblets, each different from the other. In his generosity, King Xerxes gave clear instructions to the stewards to serve everyone as they desired. Meanwhile, in the palace of King Xerxes, Queen Vashti was also holding a banquet for the women. On the 7th day of the festivities, when the king was in high spirits from the wine, he ordered 7 eunuchs, Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, to bring Queen Vashti into his presence, wearing her royal crown. The king wanted to display Vashti's beauty to all, for she was very beautiful. However, when the attendants delivered the king's command to Queen Vashti, she refused to come. Her refusal made the king furious and deeply indignant. As was customary, the king consulted his experts in matters of law and justice. He summoned the wise men who understood the laws, men close to the king: Karshena, Shetha, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan. They were the 7 nobles of Persia and Media who had direct access to the king and were the most important in the kingdom. The king asked them, "According to the law, what must be done to Queen Vashti? She has not obeyed the command of King Xerxes that the eunuchs have delivered." Then Memucan replied in the presence of the king and the nobles, "Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also all the nobles and the peoples of all the provinces of King Xerxes. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, and they will despise their husbands and say, 'King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come.' This very day, the Persian and Median women of the nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end of disrespect and discord. Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. Also, let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than her. Then when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout all his vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands from the least to the greatest." The king and his nobles were pleased with this advice, so the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent dispatches to all parts of the kingdom, to each province in its own script, and to each people in their own language, proclaiming that every man should be ruler over his own household. Later, when King Xerxes' anger had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed about her. Then the king's attendants proposed, "Let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint commissioners in every province of his realm to bring all these beautiful young women into the harem at the citadel of Susa. Let them be placed under the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch who is in charge of the women, and let beauty treatments be given to them. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti." This advice appealed to the king, and he followed it. Now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin, named Mordecai, son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, among those taken captive with Jehoiakim, king of Judah. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom everyone knew as Esther. I was that young woman. My father and mother had died, and Mordecai took me in as his own daughter. When the king's decree was proclaimed, many young women were brought to the citadel of Susa and placed under the care of Haggai. I was also taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Haggai. For some reason, I found favor in his eyes, and he showed me special kindness. He provided me with beauty treatments, special food, and even assigned 7 young women from the king's palace to serve me. Moreover, I was moved to the best place in the harem. Mordecai, who always looked after me, had instructed me to keep my background and the identity of my people a secret, and so I did. Every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how I was and what was happening to me. Before a young woman's turn came to go in to King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the women, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 with perfumes and cosmetics. And when the time came for her to go to the king, she was given whatever she wanted to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening, she would go there, and in the morning return to another part of the harem to be under the care of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name. When it was my turn, cousin of Mordecai, I followed the advice of Haggai and asked for nothing except what he suggested. And thanks to God, I won the favor of everyone who saw me. Finally, I was taken to King Xerxes in the royal residence in the 10th month, the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king was more attracted to me than to any of the other women, and I won his favor and approval more than any of the others. He set the royal crown on my head and made me queen instead of Vashti. To celebrate, the king gave a great banquet in my honor, the banquet of Esther, for all his nobles and officials. He also proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal liberality. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Even after I became queen, I continued to keep my family background and my people a secret, just as Mordecai had instructed me. I still followed his instructions, as I had when he was bringing me up. One day, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, he overheard something alarming. Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's officers who guarded the entrance, were furious and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. As soon as Mordecai discovered the plot, he came immediately to me, his cousin and queen, to warn me about the conspiracy. I knew I had to act quickly, so I took the information to the king, but I made sure to mention that the warning came from Mordecai. The king ordered an investigation, and when the plot was confirmed as true, the 2 officers were hanged. The entire event was recorded in the annals in the presence of the king as a testament to Mordecai's loyalty. After these events, King Xerxes decided to honor Haman, son of Hammedatha, an Agagite. He promoted him, giving him a position higher than all the other nobles in the kingdom. All the royal officials at the king's gate were commanded to bow down and pay homage to Haman as ordered by the king. However, Mordecai, my cousin, refused to bow down or pay him homage. The royal officials questioned Mordecai, asking him repeatedly why he disobeyed the king's command, but he remained steadfast, explaining that as a Jew he could not do so. Unsatisfied, the officials reported the matter to Haman to see if Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down to him, he was enraged. But upon learning that Mordecai was a Jew, Haman decided it was not enough to eliminate him alone. He planned to exterminate all the Jewish people throughout the entire empire of Xerxes. In the first month of the 12th year of King Xerxes' reign, Haman cast the pur, that is, the lot, to choose the day and the month in which his plan would be carried out. The lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. Haman then went to King Xerxes and said, "There is a certain people dispersed and scattered among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their customs are different from those of all other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will put 350 tons of silver into the royal treasury for the execution of this task." Trusting Haman, King Xerxes took his signet ring and gave it to him, granting him authority to act as he saw fit. On the 13th day of the first month, Haman summoned the king's secretaries and ordered them to write letters in all the languages and scripts of the peoples of the empire, addressed to the satraps, governors, and leaders of each province. The letters, written in the name of King Xerxes and sealed with his ring, were sent by couriers to all the provinces of the empire. The order was clear: to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and children, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the decree was issued as law in every province, and the people were instructed to be ready for that day. While the king and Haman sat down to drink, the city of Susa was thrown into confusion and great fear. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city wailing loudly and bitterly. He went as far as the king's gate, but no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter. In every province where the king's decree had reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When my maids and eunuchs came and told me about Mordecai's condition, I was deeply distressed. I sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he refused. Worried, I summoned Hathach, one of the king's officials who had been assigned to assist me, and instructed him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why he was acting in such a manner. Hathach went to speak with Mordecai in the city square, in front of the king's palace gate. Mordecai told Hathach everything that had happened, and about the amount of silver that Haman had promised to deposit into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the decree of extermination which had been issued in Susa, to show me and urge me to go before the king, to plead for mercy and intercede on behalf of our people. Hathach returned and relayed everything Mordecai had said to me. I knew the danger I faced, so I sent a message back to Mordecai through Hathach. All the king's officials and the people of the provinces of the empire know that there is only one law for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned. They shall be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their life. And I have not been called to appear before the king for over 30 days. Because you are in the king's palace, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? Reflecting on his words, I made a decision. I sent this reply to Mordecai. Go, gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days and nights. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Mordecai went away and carried out all my instructions while I prepared to face the most challenging moment of my life. 3 days later, I put on my royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace, in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne, facing the entrance. When he saw me standing in the court, I found favour in his eyes. He extended the gold scepter that was in his hand. I approached and touched the tip of the scepter, relieved that my life had been spared. The king then asked me, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request?" "Even up to half the kingdom it will be given to you," I replied carefully. "If it pleases the king, let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared for them." The king, without hesitation, ordered, "Bring Haman at once, so that we may do what Esther asks." So the king and Haman came to the banquet I had prepared for them. While they were drinking wine, the king again asked me, "What is your request?" "It will be granted." "What is your desire?" "Even up to half the kingdom, it will be fulfilled." I answered calmly, "This is my petition and my request. If the king regards me with favour, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfil my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question." On that day, Haman left the palace very happy and content. But his joy turned to anger when he saw Mordecai sitting at the king's gate, who did not stand up or show any respect in his presence. However, Haman managed to control himself and went home. There he gathered his friends and his wife, Zeresh, and began to boast. He spoke of his great wealth, his many children, and how the king had honoured and promoted him above all the other nobles and officials. Haman added, full of pride, "Besides that, I am the only one whom Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she prepared for him, and I have been invited to attend tomorrow as well with the king." But then he confessed his dissatisfaction. "Even with all this, I am not satisfied as long as I see that Jew, Mordecai, sitting at the king's gate." Then Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends gave him this advice: "Have a gallows built, more than 20 meters high, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then you can go with the king to the banquet and be happy." Haman liked the suggestion and immediately had the gallows built. That night, King Xerxes could not sleep. To pass the time, he ordered that the book of chronicles of his reign be brought and read to him. While they were reading, it was mentioned that I, Mordecai, had exposed Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's officials who guarded the entrance to the palace and had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. The king then asked, "What honour and recognition has Mordecai received for this?" His officials answered, "Nothing has been done for him." Intrigued, the king asked, "Who is in the court?" It happened that Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to ask the king to have me hanged on the gallows he had prepared. The king's officials answered, "It is Haman who is in the court. Let him enter," the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, "What should be done for the man whom the king delights to honour?" Haman, thinking that the king was referring to himself, thought, "Who would the king want to honour more than me?" So he answered the king enthusiastically, "For the man whom the king delights to honour, let them bring a royal robe that the king has worn, and a horse that the king has ridden, with a royal crest on its head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes, who will dress the man with the robe and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, 'This is what is done for the man whom the king delights to honour.'" The king, pleased with the suggestion, said to Haman, "Go quickly, take the robe and the horse, and do as you have suggested for the Jew Mordecai, who is sitting at the king's gate. Do not omit anything you have recommended." With a heavy heart, Haman took the robe and the horse, dressed me in the robe, and led me on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming in front of me, "This is what is done for the man whom the king delights to honour." After this, I returned to the king's gate, while Haman, humiliated and dejected, rushed home with his face covered. There, he told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends what had happened. His advisers and Zeresh said to him, "Since Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish origin, you will not be able to withstand him. Surely you will come to ruin." While they were still talking, the king's officials arrived and hurried Haman to the banquet that Queen Esther had prepared. King Xerxes and Haman attended the banquet given by me, Queen Esther. As we were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked, "Queen Esther, what is your request?" "You will be granted it." "What is your desire?" "Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you." Gathering my courage, I replied, "If I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases him, let my life be granted me and my people. This is my request and my desire. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as slaves and maidservants, I would have remained silent, for such distress would not justify disturbing the king." Surprised and enraged, King Xerxes asked, "Who is he and where is he who has dared to do this?" I firmly answered, "The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman." Haman, terrified, realized that his life was in danger before the king and me. Furious, the king rose, left the wine, and went out into the palace garden. Haman, seeing that the king had already decided to condemn him, stayed behind to plead for his life from me, Queen Esther. When the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, he saw Haman falling on the couch where I was reclining, and in his fury he exclaimed, "Will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house?" As soon as the king finished speaking, some officials covered Haman's face, signifying his condemnation. Then one of the officials, named Harbona, who was serving the king, said, "There is a gallows 50 cubits high at Haman's house, which he made for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king." The king then ordered, "Hang him on it." Thus Haman was hanged on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided. On that same day, King Xerxes gave me, Queen Esther, all the possessions of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. Mordecai was then brought before the king, for I had informed him that Mordecai was my relative. The king took his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. Moreover, I appointed Mordecai as the administrator of Haman's estate. However, I still begged the king, weeping at his feet, to revoke the wicked plan of Haman, the Agagite, against the Jews. The king extended the gold scepter to me, and I rose before him and said, "If it pleases the king, if I have found favor with him, and if he considers it right, let an order be written revoking the letters that Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, wrote to destroy the Jews in all the provinces of the kingdom. For how can I bear to see the disaster that will fall upon my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my own family?" King Xerxes answered me and Mordecai, "I have given Haman's estate to Esther, and have hanged him because he intended to harm the Jews. Now write another decree in the king's name, in favor of the Jews, as it seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked." This occurred on the 23rd day of the 3rd month, the month of Sivan. The king's secretaries were immediately summoned and drafted all of Mordecai's orders for the Jews, the satraps, governors, and nobles of the 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. These orders were written in the language and script of each province and people, as well as in the language and script of the Jews. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Xerxes, sealed the letters with the king's signet ring, and sent them by messengers on swift horses from the king's stables. The new decree granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed force of any people or province that threatened them, including women and children, and also the right to plunder the goods of their enemies. The decree came into effect in the provinces of King Xerxes on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. A copy of the decree was published as law in every province and made known to the people of every nation. Mordecai went out from the king's presence wearing royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold, and a purple robe of fine linen. The citadel of Susa was in joy and gladness. For the Jews it was a time of happiness, joy, celebration, and honour. In every province and city where the king's decree reached, there was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebration. Many from other peoples of the kingdom became Jews, because fear of the Jews had seized them. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the king's decree was to be enforced. On that day, the enemies of the Jews hoped to overpower them, but the opposite happened. The Jews triumphed over those who hated them. The Jews assembled in their cities, in all the provinces of King Xerxes, to attack those who sought their destruction. No one could stand against them, because all the peoples were afraid of the Jews. All the nobles of the provinces, the satraps, governors, and officials of the king supported the Jews, because the fear they had of Mordecai had seized them. Mordecai was influential in the palace. His fame spread throughout the provinces, and he became increasingly powerful. The Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and did as they pleased with them. In the citadel of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. They also killed Parsandata, Dalphon, Aspata, Parata, Adalia, Aridata, Parmashta, Arisai, Aridai, and Vaizatha, the 10 sons of Haman, son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. But they did not seize their possessions. On that same day, the total number of dead in the citadel of Susa was reported to the king, who said to Queen Esther, "The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men, and the 10 sons of Haman in the citadel of Susa. What have they done in the other provinces of the empire? Let the Jews in Susa be allowed to carry out tomorrow also the decree of today, and let the bodies of the 10 sons of Haman be hanged on the gallows." So the king commanded that it be done. The decree was published in Susa, and the bodies of the 10 sons of Haman were hanged on the gallows. The Jews of Susa assembled on the 14th day of the month of Adar and killed 300 men in Susa, but did not seize their possessions. Meanwhile, the rest of the Jews who lived in the king's provinces also gathered to protect themselves and rid themselves of their enemies. They killed 75,000 of them, but did not seize their possessions. This happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar. And on the 14th day they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. The Jews of Susa, however, had gathered on the 13th and 14th days, and on the 15th they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. Therefore, the Jews who live in villages and towns celebrate the 14th day of the month of Adar as a day of feasting and joy, a day for giving presents. Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to all the Jews in all the provinces of King Xerxes, both near and far, declaring that they should celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar. For on these days the Jews were relieved from their enemies. In this month their sorrow was turned into joy, and their mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote to them to observe these days as days of feasting and joy, of giving gifts to one another and to the poor. Therefore these days were called Purim, from the word pur. Considering everything that was written in this letter, what they had seen and what had happened, the Jews decided to establish the custom that they and their descendants and all who joined them should not fail to celebrate these 2 days annually, in the manner prescribed and at the proper time. Even in the palace, my life continued to be a journey of faith and service. I never forgot my roots and the God of Israel who had placed me in that position. Every day I thanked the Lord for giving me the courage to speak the truth to the king and for the opportunity to save my people from destruction. The final years of my reign were relatively peaceful, and I was able to see the fruits of our efforts come to fruition. Mordecai's name continued to be respected throughout the kingdom, and his influence ensured that justice was administered with compassion and wisdom. I, for my part, continued to intercede for the people, always attentive to their needs and challenges. The peace we established was a testament to God's faithfulness. I was blessed not only with a position of power, but with the chance to make a difference in thousands of lives. Although my story began as a simple orphan in a foreign land, the Lord raised me up to be a queen who brought salvation to her people. Now, looking back, I see how every step, every decision was guided by the hand of the Most High. The love and gratitude I received from my people were rewards I will carry with me forever. And so my story, which began in humility, ended with honor and the assurance that the Lord always cares for those who trust in Him.